Like Godzilla, Mothra is a timeless kaiju and one of the big five in Toho's library of monsters, and probably the most popular Toho monster besides Godzilla himself. Even for its time, Mothra was a rather unique kaiju. Prior to her film being released, many giant insect and invertebrate films tried to make their creatures terrifying and stuck to animals which people did not like in general, spiders, scorpions, and whatnot. Even looking at the three other solo monster films from Toho, Mothra was the only one not to die at the end of her movie, and across other non-Godzilla Toho monster films, Mothra was still the only one to come out of her film alive. Which, I think that's actually kind of ironic considering how often she dies. Memes aside, if you want to hear me talk about Mothra in more depth, specifically her character, then I suggest you watch my Zilla Discourse episode with Donnie Winter, and I was also on his channel too, so please check that out. Like with Godzilla, I want to point out the aspects of Mothra's design and how these parts elevate her. These parts would be her head, her wings, her legs, and her abdomen. But before I go into Mothra Imago's design, I briefly want to go over the Mothra Larvae design. Mothra Larvae is probably the most consistent design Toho has ever made across its entire filmography. The most drastic take would probably be the primitive Mothra larvae from Rebirth of Mothra 3, but even then, it's really only the small details that make it different. It still has the tusk, eyes, and mandibles that make Mothra larvae Mothra larvae. The most drastic take would probably have to be the King of the Monsters Mothra, as its shape is completely different and its face is also very different. But both of these take aspects of regular caterpillars, who have a wide variety of differences already, but they keep it consistent among themselves to allow the character to be recognizable. I would also like to say that Mothra larvae just doesn't look like a giant caterpillar. I mean, the general shape is similar, but its face helps it stand out. This is unlike other giant insect creatures like, say, the giant mantis, which is very much just a giant mantis. I also want to quickly point out that I think it's quite interesting that older concept art of Mothra larva had it looking a lot more like an actual caterpillar. What's even more interesting is this old Mothra design right here. She actually has legs. It's really interesting to see some of the older kaiju concept arts because there's a lot of things that don't appear in the films or never revisited in the films, and this is definitely one of them right here. Mothra with really long legs. I think it kind of frankly makes her look like an ultra kaiju in a way, and it makes you wonder what she would have looked like or how she would have been portrayed if she had legs like this. If it would have been like a man in a suit similar to Godzilla, but that's neither here nor there. This is definitely a perfect segue to talk about the actual Mothra's legs, which are generally pretty small for the beginning in the Showa series. However, I would say that due to Eiji Tsubure's model work and working with the puppet, Mothra is very animated, and despite her legs being very small, they do move around a lot, and that was a very good thing. However, in the Heisei series, despite Mothra having a very similar design, her legs aren't as animated, and they just sort of feel like a clump on the design. And this would later be changed in the Millennium series as her legs would get very elongated, starting with GMK. In that case, her legs, again, still not really animated, they sort of stick there, and they can sort of feel like they're just sort of lingering off the design, and they don't move as much, and I feel that the design is helped by the modeler who works with it, and that's why Eiji Tsubure's Mothra is always remembered in comparison to maybe some of the other Mothra puppets. But even with Tokyo SOS Mothra, which has very similar problems, and although she does similar things like in both films, GMK and Tokyo SOS. She grabs Godzilla by his head, throws him around. It's only in those few instances where her legs are of actual use do they move around. And I can only really remember Tokyo SOS Mothra's legs primarily because one of them gets bitten off by Godzilla. So there is that. The legs aren't something where you could say one was better when one wasn't, because the one that was better was helped primarily by a better special effects artist. So that's that. But if you look at the King of the Monsters Mothra design, her legs are similar to that of a mantis, and they are quite animated. So right there, that is an example of long legs being well animated, and of course, for Showa, short legs being animated. So that just helps my argument even further. But what really stands out for Mothra is her wings. This is because in nature, moths and by extension butterflies have a variety of different wing shapes. However, Mothra has had a pretty consistent wing shape throughout the entirety of the franchise. They are long and pointed towards the front, but they are somewhat teardrop shaped towards the back. However, there have been experimentation. Toho specifically did this in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy. You had Armor Mothra, Lightspeed Mothra, Aqua Mothra, etc., but those were extremely drastic, and I would say a more contemporary example would be the King of the Monsters Mothra. They're extremely long at the front, and there's no back teardrop shape, and the front ends are rather broad and not sort of tipped, as it were. The reason I want to bring this up is because Mothra's wings are distinctly shaped, and, like with Godzilla, a silhouette is important to making an iconic character, and Mothra's wings taking up the majority of their silhouette are important to establish this. Of course, a silhouette isn't everything. Color is going to be important when you're looking at a monster because you're not just seeing their shape. Mothra's main colors have been orange and yellow throughout the entire series. Black and white have also been used, working as neutral colors to break up these two warmer colors. Drastic takes on Mothra, such as Mothra Leo, have incorporated cooler colors such as green, blue, and purple. And a more standard Mothra take like the GMK Mothra have used purple in her design as well. I'm not sure if this is intentional, but I think it's interesting that cooler colors have been used to break up and show more drastic takes on the character. Of course, since orange and yellow and black have been so synonymous with Mothra's classic look, it was used to homage her in King of the Monsters. Of course, legs and wings can't exist in a void. You've got to have the head of your creature, and Mothra's head is rather recognizable. Let's look at moths in real life and see what Mothra takes away from them. Oh. Ew. Yeah. God. I don't think I'm ever going to look at a lamp beam the same again. But, jokes aside, Mothra's head in comparison to some other abominations is quite rounded. She has mandibles, and she has small little antennae pieces on the sides of her face, unlike most other moths whose mandibles are inside their mouth and they have their long proboscis. Although these proboscises are more common on butterflies than on moths, again, they are still noticeable. But the main thing Mothra takes away from actual moths is her compound eyes. Her compound eyes have stayed relatively the same in color, although once again there have been changes, but the primary blue, being the one cool color amongst most Mothra designs, helps break it up in the front. And of course the neutral of the brown and the white helps to accentuate that. And then once again, the King of the Monsters Mothra does a lot of changes to this. Her mandibles are a lot larger, however, she does keep the similar blue compound eyes. Their shape is actually relatively similar, but again, it's the King of the Monsters Mothra design. It just wants to be special now, doesn't it? Finally is the abdomen. Depending on the moth, the abdomen can either be fairly small or quite large. Because of how Mothra's wings are usually attached to her body, the abdomen is quite accentuated. However, Cotton Mothra, being the one exception as usual, has a pretty small abdomen. Her wings are very large, and because of how they're attached to her body, the abdomen is not accentuated. I also think this was probably due to the fact they wanted to hide the fact that she has a stinger, although I can neither confirm or deny what I am saying. Now, like what I did with Godzilla 54 through 62, I will be looking at several Mothra designs and talking about what makes them all similar and what makes them all different. I'm only going to be looking at these 6 Mothra in particular because they either are from a specific era and the era didn't really change in terms of design, or they are a specific aspect of Mothra that I want to look at or have talked about. However, I will not be including the anime Mothra in this discussion. And the reason why is because, well, it is literally just a silhouette, and as I've been talking about, a silhouette is important to the character, and it unironically, or probably like, it probably did ironically just destroy what makes Mothra's design as a whole recognizable. The only reason that I think anyone knows this is Mothra is because of the Hotua and because of Mothra's chirping. If we saw this without that context, I think people would have thought this was a new Moth Kaiju or another generation of Mothra, because I would say, unlike Godzilla, who's had drastic changes, Mothra has again stayed relatively consistent. And here we see different wings, the head's really small and the neck sticks out. Of course, you have the chirping, but I bet you someone would probably tell me that this is good because the themes of the anime trilogy and God and stuff, and how maybe when we actually see God, it's not what we think of it, or something faux intellectual like that to justify a poor silhouette of Mothra. But let's get into the Showa design first. Of course, the Showa design had a rather large head. The brown is very muted, and there is some white, again orange, yellow, and black, breaking up the design of the wings, and this would carry over into the Heisei and into the Millennium designs. Again, the most consistent being the Heisei and Millennium, however the differences between those being the legs of the Millennium design being very long, and that being shared between both Millennium designs being JMK and Tokyo SOS. A noticeable detail on the Tokyo SOS Mothra is that it has a lot of peach fuzz, you could call it, on its wings and on its body. Of course, Mothra has had this consistently throughout almost all of her designs, and a lot of people will say that the Heisei design looks way too fluffy, like it's a plush. And I would say that is true in some cases, where Mothra looks very stiff when she's flying, but I think that the arrangement of the fuzz in the Tokyo SOS's case, it gives her a rather regal appearance, and the patterning with the black and the white, it just looks very beautiful in my opinion. And then there's also the eyes of the GMK Mothra. I did say that with the Mothra eyes, they're always really similar, there haven't changes, and in the case of GMK Mothra, her eyes are a little bit more purple than they are blue. It's still a cool color, but again, it's a little bit darker, gives her a little bit more of a royal edge, as you were, and this actually complements her wings, which is very nice. And I think one thing I should note is this is the one Mothra that really doesn't have any peach fuzz on her. I think it actually kind of robs the design of some of what makes Mothra unique, because the legs especially, they look very artificial. There's not a lot of detailing on them, and they're almost just this pure white, which I'd say that is the biggest problem I had specifically with that Mothra design, because a lot of the other Mothra designs are either, the legs are either so small you can barely see the coloring on them, or the claws are very distinct in comparison to the legs. Specifically, the Heisei Mothra does this well. And even the Tokyo SOS Mothra, where its legs are very long like the GMK Mothra, they're brown with a lot of darker colors breaking up the segmented pieces. And then there is Mothra Leo. Mothra Leo being male, unlike every one of these Mothra being female. What I find interesting is he's the only Mothra ever to have green in his coloration. Again, this may have been because he was male and they were trying to distinguish that in comparison to his mother, who is essentially the same design as the Heisei Mothra, but I do find it interesting. And another thing of note is that his wings, like I've said, Mothra's wings are usually angled a specific way. His angle forward a little bit more. This makes the front of his wings, the longer portion, as I've stated, to accentuate a little bit more, and he almost has a jet fighter-like appearance to him. And this would be further elaborated on in his other designs, such as Armor Mothra and so on. And then we come to the King of the Monsters Mothra. I've been kind of memeing on it throughout this video, but I have such a problem with this design. I think that how it's implemented is implemented okay, but I feel that they were just working around with too many different insects. Like, Mothra's got the stinger of a hornet, the legs of a praying mantis, the general body of a moth, and they all come together to give an insect monster that, in the context of the film, you know is Mothra, but it feels like something is missing. And I don't even say it's like the roar or anything, because a lot of the Mothras have had different pitches of the roar, and like that's not an issue. Even the anime Mothra has the roar, but that's not really an issue. I like Rodan's roar in King of the Monsters. I don't think it's bad, and his design is excellent. Like, it captures the spirit of Rodan very well. I feel, however, that Mothra was not accentuated as well, and I think this is due to the fact that her role in the film was to be the side character to Godzilla. That might have been a reason. Or it's because they just wanted to make her smaller so that she could contend with Rodan, which again, Rodan and Mothra were side characters to Ghidorah and Godzilla, so that may have been that Mothra's design kind of got shafted, as it were, because of her role in the film. And if that is true, that's it's something to keep in mind, especially if you want to get into design, because a character's role in the film will affect how you as a designer may have to design them. So please keep note of that. And personally, out of all of the King of the Monsters designs we've gotten, Mothra's is my least favorite, and I think that's saying something, especially when King of the Monsters has my favorite design of Rodan, one of my favorite King Ghidorah designs, and a very good update to what was already an okay Godzilla design. So please keep this in note, and it's just a brief overview of the general examinations of most of the Mothras across the entire franchise. But as always, it's come to that point in the video where I say, what can you do to improve your own kaiju or make new kaiju? And what I'd say is, don't make moth kaiju. Take these 3 kaiju here. They are made by a user on Instagram by the name of Kaiju Gorodrak, and despite them all being winged insectoids, they aren't moths. They are based on wasps, but they still capture a similar shape and are winged flying insects, but again, not moths. Godzilla takes up a generalized idea of what dinosaurs are, but even then, the idea of dinosaurs has changed so much since Godzilla was made that he is kind of apart from dinosaurs at this point, and he is his own unique design. Unlike Mothra and moths, which are still around, Mothra fills the idea and the shape of a moth kaiju far too closely to where even slight changes will seem extremely derivative. For example, this was a kaiju I made while I was doing a thing called Kaiju art or Kaiju ripoff, and when I was designing it, any kind of small alterations to the basic shape of a moth felt too derivative. And I would say even the Kata Mothra does this to an extent, but like here, this looks nothing like Mothra. It's got arms, legs aren't the same, body, wings, color, all different maybe except for the orange. But again, there is so much difference here. Even the larval form's extremely different. And that is the problem that Mothra does, because it occupies the idea of a moth so well. So I would say that Mothra is a stepping stone to say, this is a moth, do something else. And what I did to do something else was this guy right here. He's called Kukumura, and he does not have anything to do with moths, and he is the first insectoid kaiju of my Zogra Heaven's Wrath series. And I will probably go into him further when I'm looking at another insectoid kaiju in the Godzilla series, but that's neither here nor there. So my big takeaway is, look to different insects that aren't moths, my guys. But without further ado, I'm Zimzilla, and I'll see you guys next time.